Most Americans are ill-informed just like most Chinese. The most conspicuous evidence is communism. Communism is just an idea. No country has achieved it yet. But most Americans obviously don't know that. They hate communism like it's a plague. The rich people have every reason to hate communism, but why poor people also hate it? Now imagine you have a daughter, 5 years old. One day she suddenly has a stomachache. You drive her to the hospital, and the doctor tells you that your daughter has a very rare disease. The good news is that there's a treatment. The bad news is that it's very expensive. It will cost you $5,000 each month, and the treatment will last for at least 6 months. Sadly, you were fired a month ago, still hunting for a new job. You and your wife are barely able to pay the bills. Where can you get the money? You have no idea. If you live in a communist country, the situation will be different. The treatment will be completely free because there's no money in communism. Everybody works for free, including you and the doctors. Now, if this is the first time you learn about communism, the normal reaction would be, wow, that's some idea, but I don't see how it works. Or, it sounds great, everybody will be more equal. Or, that's a dumb idea, why would anybody work if they don't get paid? Or maybe too idealistic, it's impossible in reality. But you will never say that's an evil idea and I hate it. Communism is calling for equality. Why is it evil? Yet Americans hate it nonetheless. So obviously Americans have no idea what communism really is. Most of them don't even know the difference between communism and socialism. Americans are living in an environment where information flows freely. Why are they ill-informed? It's tempting to jump to the conclusions that the internet is evil, or social media is toxic, or the politicians are liars, or people are dumb. This is the most common one. But none of them is the truth. The alpha limitation is the real culprit. Most of the people in this world are busy just making a living. Who has the extra time to fully understand the whole world before drawing any conclusions? Even if you can live millions of years, your puny brain still won't be big enough to handle all the information. But our brains need patterns to function. That's why we have stereotypes about people and why the first impression is so important. We always say, don't judge a book by its cover. But I learned the opposite lesson. When I published my first book on Amazon several years ago, I was deeply frustrated that no one was buying it. So I began to learn how to sell books. Many experts generously share their experiences online. And they all give the same piece of advice, that a professionally designed cover was essential. I didn't really pay much attention to it at first, until one day when I was doing research on Amazon bookstore. I realized that I only clicked on those books with attractive covers. Otherwise, how do we judge a book really? There are literally millions of books in Amazon bookstore. Do we have time to read them all before we judge them? This world is too complicated. To make our lives easier, we have been trying to simplify it since the beginning of our civilization. The ancient Greeks reduced everything in this world to 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire. The ancient Chinese did the same, only with 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The more popular simplification is dualism. The whole world is simplified into only 2 elements: good and evil, yin and yang, mind and matter, light and dark, order and chaos, life and death, male and female, etc. If it is still not simple enough, people like Lao Tzu went even further. They simplified the world into only 1 element. In Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu said that Tao was the origin of everything. How fancy! God is another example of monism. The randomness of this world always confuses us and makes us frustrated. But if the randomness is actually controlled by some supernatural beings, that could significantly reduce our anxiety. It means that this world is not truly random. There are some rules to follow. Our brains can finally do their jobs. Plato also provided a similar idea, that everything in reality is just imperfect projections of some models called the Platonic forms. According to this idea, a horse in reality is only an imperfect copy of a horse form. That's why every horse is different in reality. So in a way, Plato's idea is also monism. He reduced the whole world into one element. In his chariot allegory, he simplified the complicated decision-making system inside our brains into three elements. He said our mind is like a chariot with a charioteer and two horses. One horse is good and inclined to do the right things, representing the morality. Another horse is wild and inclined to make bad choices, representing our pure desire. The charioteer is our ability to reason and handle the two horses. This simplification is still quite popular today. Math is the most useful simplification. If something can be calculated, we can make very precise predictions. For example, astronomers can precisely calculate when and where the next solar eclipse will happen. In some area, the calculation could be astonishingly precise. James Webb telescope is now orbiting the Sun in a very particular way. It's flying about 1.5 million kilometers away from the Earth. Its orbit was calculated before the launch. The gravity from the Sun and the Earth will precisely keep the telescope at the same distance from the Earth forever. That's the magic of math. Unfortunately, when we face our society, we are out of luck. So far, we have zero equations. We can't do any kind of a calculation about what's going to happen to our society tomorrow. There are too many variables in our society. The possible outcomes are always infinite. In the future, when we understand our world much better, maybe we can eventually do some calculations. But now we still have to depend on the good old guesswork. Everybody is guessing what's going to happen next. Sometimes we guess right, sometimes we guess wrong. We learn to take the consequences and move on. Only when things turn so bad that we would start a revolution to make a drastic change. As the result, we drive our society like an amateur player playing a racing game. When the car hits the left curb, we turn the wheel all the way to the right. Then the car hits the right curb, we turn the wheel all the way to the left. And the whole process is repeated again and again. Due to the fact that our brains are pattern seekers and this world is too complicated, three types of information are always more attractive to us. They are the ambrosia to our puny brains. The first one is oversimplified information. The second one, bad news. The third one, overly dramatic stories. I've already mentioned the bad news in the previous chapters. Our minds tend to focus on the bad things in our society because bad things hurt us. So we evolved to be very sensitive to bad things. In the adventure of Huckleberry Finn, Jim explains the mechanism almost perfectly. Huck noticed that Jim is very superstitious. Almost everything is a bad sign. Huck couldn't help but ask Jim if there are any good signs. Jim explains that there are good signs, but they are useless. If you see a bad sign, you can do something to avoid the bad thing. But if you see a good sign, what are you going to do? Avoid it? Of course not. You don't have to do anything. So the good signs are completely useless. Being sensitive to bad things and bad news is our basic instinct. As a result, our impression of how our society functions is always one-sided and unbalanced or even completely twisted. Kind of like when you are healthy, you would never notice that you are healthy. But when you are sick, you would have a strong sense that you are unhealthy. Even though you've been healthy most of the time in your life, but you don't remember that. The healthy part of your life is way less impressive to your brain. Our feelings about the society follow the same bias, which means the society actually is always better than we think. It's our disposition of being hypersensitive only to the bad things that twists our impressions. This disposition not only affects how we look at our societies right now, it also twists our understanding of history in general. When we look at history, we also tend to focus on the bad things and completely ignore all the normal things and the good things. Actually, we are specifically looking for bad things in history and writing them down. When we talk about history, we tend to talk about the sick moments only, wars, disasters, plagues, etc. The truth is that most time our world functioned just fine. Population was growing constantly and consistently. The GDP was increasing steadily. Our way of educating people also was improving through time. But unfortunately, normality is extremely boring. It leaves nothing in our mind. The two narratives at the beginning of the last chapter are the typical examples of the oversimplified information. So let me tell you what China's collapse looks like. After the First Opium War, China began to collapse. If people had internet or social media back then, you would definitely see videos with titles like The Qing Empire is ending, or The Dragon is falling, or China's collapse countdown 25 days. The reality is that it took 70 years before the Qing dynasty officially ended in 1911. Lots of things happened during this long collapse, including one of the most deadly civil wars in Chinese history. China is just too big. Even falling takes a super long period of time. So next time, if we want to predict China's collapse, make a title like this: China's Collapse Countdown, 190 years. See how many people are going to be impressed by that. This title is much more well-informed, but it's much less attractive to our brains than China's Collapse Countdown 5 days. The typical examples of the overly dramatic stories are conspiracy theories. Like 911 was an inside job, moon landing didn't happen, aliens built pyramids, the spherical Earth is the biggest lie, Hitler escaped to South America, space aliens are among us, there's a social credit system in China, etc. Stories are attractive to our mind because they provide illusions that this world actually has some patterns. Like the good guys will be rewarded, and the bad guys will have their comeuppance. Or working hard, and they will win the game. Or lying has dire consequences. Or working together, we can accomplish anything. Stories show us certainties. A certain cause always leads to a certain effect without any randomness. Stories also can easily stimulate our brains by showing interesting events. Interesting events are how our brains simplify this world and find patterns. For example, if you see lots of zeros, you ignore them. The sequence will be simplified as there are just lots of zeros until something else happens. Likewise, if this sequence begins to repeat, our brains will lose interest pretty soon. The information will be simplified as lots of zeros and then a smiley face. That's the reason stories are full of low possibility events like coincidences. They are the smiley face in the boring and repetitive mundane life. The moment we see a coincidence, our brains will immediately begin to analyze if a pattern could be found. Even if in the end no pattern is found, our brains were still quite excited in the process. The conspiracy theories take advantage of this feature of our brains. The fact is, no matter how dramatic some historical events were originally, they always got old after a while. A more dramatic version would rekindle people's interest. Sometimes some message could be the combination of two types, or even all three types. Most conspiracy theories combine the overly dramatic stories and the bad news. Transforming the events into bad news will boost effect. People will be excited that they found some new alarming patterns in the previously boring stories. The famous quote from Sartre, "Hell is other people," is the combination of oversimplified information and bad news. If you think about your daily life, you realize that most time you didn't have any negative interactions with other people. But when the negative interactions eventually happen, they are always more impressive because they are painful. In the end, you will simplify your life experiences by forgetting all the positive and the neutral interactions. What's left is negative things. That's how you got depressed. Not just you, that's how we all got depressed by the world we live in. Hence, hell is other people. But heaven is also other people. You want to celebrate New Year's Eve with others. You want to share a joke with your friends. Happiness will be amplified when we do that. Unfortunately, if I say, hell is other people and heaven is also other people, the message is more complete, but it will lose all its impact on our brains immediately. So if I say hell is other people, your reaction would be like, wow, that's deep, that's profound. But if I say hell is other people and heaven is also other people, your reaction could be like a meh. Oversimplified messages, bad news, and overly dramatic stories are the ambrosia to our puny brains. No one can resist them. You can clearly see the danger of these three types of information. They are the source of a misunderstanding, bigotry, racism, and hatred. As I mentioned in the previous chapters, when some Chinese were overwhelmed by the bad things in China, they couldn't take it, and they began to hate everything related to China. They turned into self-hating Chinese and spread their hatred everywhere in the world. Many people inside China deeply believed that China could only be saved by duplicating everything from the Western world without any modifications after they received one-sided information about the Western world ever since they were a little kid. The conclusion they drew was simple. Everything in China was wrong and everything in the Western world was right. Ironically, a new cultural movement is in motion today. Some Chinese began to turn everything upside down. They began to reject everything from the entire Western world, again based on the partial information, majorly the bad things they newly discovered in the Western world. Americans have the freedom of speech. Unfortunately, the brain ambrosia is not going to leave them alone. There's no censorship in America. But when people face the ocean of information today, they have to build up their own censorship. Otherwise, they are going to drown in the ocean. The Republicans will never watch or hear anything from the liberal media. Likewise, the Democrats will reject everything from the conservative media. The Christians will only accept the certified information channel. Do you think the Christians would ever read books like The God Delusion? The moment they see the title, they would throw it away or even burn it. So when they talk about China, they want to keep it simple. Who cares about China? Anyway, Americans have their own troubles to worry about. So the simpler China is, the better. If China could be simplified as a shithole country, it would be the best. Or maybe the other way around. China is a paradise. It's also good. Who cares? As long as it's simple, people would believe it. But the shithole version serves Americans better. It gives Americans a sense of superiority. American media has no guts to provide complicated information to confuse their audiences. Reinforcing what they have already known is a better strategy for the business. Before long, Americans are already living in a small bubble. Isolating ourselves in a small bubble is the easiest way to simplify the information we receive. Our brains won't be bothered and confused by contradictory information, which is the feature of more comprehensive and balanced information. Because of this feature of our brains, any system will inevitably be plagued by the brain ambrosia. Even if the system didn't start like that, it will always end like that. So people will always be ill-informed, no matter what kind of environment they live in. For the same reason, it's always enticing to believe that politicians are evil because they are all liars, or the media is evil because they spread misinformation according to their agenda, or American movie makers have been aggravating conspiracy theories for decades. It's true that politicians tend to lie, but not because they are evil. If telling the truth will help them achieve their goals, they will tell people the truth. They are practical, not idealistic. But all the successful politicians understand too well the power of the brain ambrosia. They know too well that truth is too complicated and usually boring. Nobody likes it. The politicians, the media, and the movie makers only adapt to the environment. Like I mentioned, we've been trying to simplify the world for thousands of years. It's not that only the politicians are adapting to the environment, it's everyone. Because of the alpha limitation, only simplified messages can survive in our brains. Is there a solution? I don't think so. The alpha limitation is a physical limitation like gravity. We cannot get rid of gravity. It always exists, no matter what we do. Maybe a reform of education could help us mitigate the situation. We should educate our children by feeding them contradictory information from an early age, training their brains to get used to the truth. But unfortunately, I don't think it would work as we expect. We still have the same tiny brain, and we still face the ocean of information. We will always be craving for the brain ambrosia. The good news is that we've been working on a possible workaround for thousands of years. But it's not what you're thinking.